Print bigger, print better, with Titanic Prints. Hello and welcome to Titanic Prints. Today I'm going to try and show you how to get the most out of your FDM printer and get fantastic results. What I got here for you already is I've already got my Cura pulled up, and I have a couple of these wings. Now, you could certainly print them like this, you could certainly print them like this, but how do you get the best results from this? So, when you print on an FDM, you always want to look at your verticality. That is going to give you your most detail. Another thing I like to do is always try and go largest to smallest. So we put the largest on the bottom, smallest at the top. That gives you better build plate adhesion and also prevents it from getting knocked over and tipped over later. So if I was given these two wings, how would I orient them? Simple. I'm just going to go ahead and click here to rotate that down. There we go. And then over here, let's rotate it this way. Oop, the other way. Okay, so this is going to give me the best print. The very, very top is relatively flat, so that should look fine when it gets printed. All of the detail is on the Z-axis, so that should get printed fine. And because this is the part that actually attaches to the rest of the model and won't be seen, that is the side I'm going to have on the bottom. Keep in mind that you're always going to have support scars, meaning that anywhere that there are supports, no matter how good the supports are, outside of dual extruder PVA printing, you're always going to have support scars. So when you're thinking about how to orient these, I always make sure to put the bottom or anywhere that can be hidden where the supports are. Now, looking over this, it may be tempting to take this flat spot here and make that the bottom. So if we were to do that, what would that look like? Something like that. Now, this may be tempting to do, right? You have a better bottom adhesion, sticks to the bed better. However, if we look at this, you can see that it's not very well 90 degrees. So keeping in mind that an FDM printer prints in layers, having it at a slight angle like this will actually give you worse results. I'll go ahead and preview it so I can show you what I'm talking about when we compare side by side. As this loads, bear with it. I've got a lot of stuff off screen that I'm going to go over here shortly, so this may take a little bit longer than normal. Okay, so looking at this when we preview it, not only can you see that it's going to use a lot more support material, which is no good, when we actually go layer by layer, you'll see that over here, this is nice and smooth, nice and vertical. You're going to have nice, clean lines. Over here, that's not the case. You're going to have a little bit more of a stair-stepping pattern going on as it has the slight angles. This will make the layer lines actually look much worse than they truly are. By keeping them exactly vertical like this, although there are still these layer lines, when you physically have them, or when you physically are looking at them with the eye, it looks much, much cleaner. If you really wanted to go the extra mile and do a little bit of sanding, again, this is going to be easier to sand and finish than something like this. So now what happens if you have something a little bit more complicated? Well, I'm about to show you. Let's start with these toes. You can tell that now you have to make a decision. Do you want to print it vertical, as it shows, to get the best possible detail out of it? Or do you want to lay it flat on the very bottom? For me, personally, I would lay this one flat. And the reason for it is that you are losing all of your detail here if you do lay it flat. However, since this is going to be the bottom of the foot anyway, typically speaking, you shouldn't see it. Okay, so laying these flat. So now let's take a peek. You know, we're still got a lot of this stuff on the vertical. This little shallow spot here where it's a real shallow angle, that is going to have a little bit of that stair stepping. However, it's overall not too bad. The other nice thing about this is because it is lower on the Z-axis, you have less chance of it tipping and failing. Also, because of this very large support area, overall it's, you know, again, not going to fall over or fail. Now, one thing you can also do on this, if you really want to not deal with digging out all the supports or maybe making it a little bit better, is we can drop this 1 millimeter, which is going to just make that a little bit flatter. Now, do keep in mind that if you do that, you will need to do that for all of the toes, as this particular model calls for two of these and two of those. So what if something is a lot even more complicated, where it doesn't have a nice, obvious, flat bottom? Well, that's a little bit more complicated, but I'll show you how I take care of that. Let's start with this particular model. This is a foot, so again, this will go down. You can see that there is quite a lot of detail there as well, so you may want to retain that. You may not mind about that. For something like this, I personally would again print this exactly as it is, keeping in mind that if I lowered those toes by 1 millimeter, as I showed earlier, I would also lower this by 1 millimeter. But what if you wanted to keep all of this detail and you didn't want it to have the support scars and the damage? How would you go about that? Well, simply again, keeping in mind that the vertical is going to give you the best results, I would flip it something like this. And the reason I flip it this direction is you can see that this is much wider than this. You will get a little bit better adhesion. Furthermore, you won't have to support these if they're up in the air like it is. So you're getting a little bit better support, a little bit better adhesion. So if I went ahead and sliced this, we can show you exactly what I mean. Perfect. Now that it's sliced, we can go ahead and preview it to see exactly how the supports are going to work and exactly how it's going to print. That is a lot of support material. Again, I typically wouldn't print this way unless you absolutely wanted to retain that detail. But when we look at it from this side, all of that detail is going to print very nicely on the vertical. Now, of course, you can always go into your settings and adjust the amount of supports that you actually need. These supports should pop out relatively easily, so I'm not too worried about that. But once again, if you wanted to retain that detail, simply go ahead and make it print on the vertical like this. However, once again, if this were my model, I would print it exactly like that, so that it is nice and crisp on the sides. This will look just fine. And again, something on the inside like this foot isn't truly going to be visualized that much on the final model, so you can get away with a few issues here or there. But what if you have an extremely complex piece that one would argue should be on a resin print? I'll show you how I'll print that next. Okay, so what I have here are two models that don't really have a good, simple, easy way to print. You can see that on this side of the model there's lots of little details. On this side of the model you got lots of details. On this side of the model you've got lots of details. And obviously on the outside you've got lots of details. It is both rounded here and rounded there. So how do we handle that? Furthermore, on this little model here, we can see that it has two ball joints. Similar, it's got details on the back, sides, front, bottom, top, etc. So again, in maintaining the thought process of always printing your best details on the vertical, I would print these almost exactly as shown. Thinking about the model itself, typically I would want to have this on the bottom to again go back to my earlier mention of larger on the bottom, smaller on the top. However, anytime you print a model in multiple parts, you always want to think of how does this actually go together. So looking here, this is a knee joint. The knee joint is going to be hidden once it is in the actual knee socket. So looking at this model, I am going to try and get it as perfectly vertical as I can and trust in my support settings to do the rest. Now for this particular model, a smaller ball socket, let's just take a peek here. How does that work? I would either print it that way or possibly like that. Typically speaking, I don't like printing ball sockets directly on the build plate, as I have a terrible time with these getting loose and then the entire model failing. So just to be safe, I would rather print it like not like that. I personally would rather print it like this myself and lose a little bit of a detail on the front than I would risk it to fall. Or, if you have multiple printers, I would simply print these alone on their own plate, potentially one, potentially all six, maybe one at a time, if you have that luxury, and then leave something like this separate. But if I were to print these two together, just as shown, I would certainly do it this way as to not risk this falling and failing and then screwing this one up. So taking a peek at this one, I have this one pretty well vertical. Looking at where my support scars are going to be, they're going to be all up in this gear, which again won't matter because that should be getting put into the actual knee joint. A little bit of support scarring up underneath, again that will all be hidden, and then a little bit of support scarring here on these lower surfaces, which again, keeping the idea of what this model is physically going to look like, all of that should be pretty well hidden, and then the important spot, the outside of the leg, which you will absolutely see on the model, is protected. So we're going to go ahead and slice this and take a peek at how the supports are going to look. Okay, now that model is sliced, let's take a look at it. Okay, we have quite a bit more support than I was expecting on this particular leg, which can be a good thing. Looking over here, again, those will pop out pretty easy. That's good. One thing I like to look for, especially when looking at my supports, is making sure that all of these are easily able to get popped out. Simply taking a tool or pliers, being able to pull these away. If this entire model was fully encased in supports and you did not see any of these red bits around, then typically what I will do is add a support blocker to make little gaps in order to pull these supports out. However, looking over this one, I think this is going to be just fine. It may cause a little bit of issue, but overall I think this is good to send it exactly as is. But again, you can see there is a lot of support material making sure that this does not tip over. I'm confident in this print. I don't believe it's going to fall. And again, with the actual spots where the supports are making contact with the model, overall all of these should be hidden or on the inside. So big takeaways, always make sure that you're printing all of the detail that you want on the vertical axis. You don't want to be laying it sideways or flat, such as I have over here, unless in this case you have two ball joints on either end where you don't really have a good other way to do it. If you do have the luxury of having both a resin and an FDM, this would be a good contender to put on your resin printer just to give a nice, clean, crisp print without having to worry about the support scars. But if you are like me, who for the longest time just ran on FDM machines and you wanted to make the most out of it, this is how I would support these particular models. If you have any further questions or examples you'd like me to go over, simply indicate so in the comments below. And until next time, this has been Titanic Prints. Thank you so much for watching. If you learned anything, please subscribe to the channel, and if this video is helpful, like this video as well. Each like equals one perfectly leveled print bed.